Welcome to Provocative Conversations from Twice 5 Miles Radio. I'm your host, James Navé. Thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. I'm recording this show in Manila. I arrived here on Friday morning. Today is Monday, and I'm sitting on a couch in a cool air-conditioned room. It's always hot here in Manila. I'll be here till March, and I will skip the North American winter in favor of a warmer climate. I'm here for the next 3.5 months visiting Tish Ayez, the woman that I've shared my life with for the last 21 years. Tish works as a corporate executive in Manila, and I'm able to come here and enjoy my time with her as well as see a bit of Manila. Some people say it's an acquired taste. I understand what that means. It's a busy place. 15 million people in Metro Manila, so you can imagine how crowded it is. That said, there are a lot of layers here, and I've always enjoyed layers. The idea that something is under something. It's not exactly what you see or what you think you see. There's always something else just around the corner. And the reason I love that is because that's not only true here in Manila and other big cities and small cities, really anywhere you live. There's always something underneath. It's also true in the poetic realms as well, which I've talked a great deal about here on this show over the years. And I plan to continue to talk about it more. How could you ever exhaust conversations around the poetic sensibilities of life, poetry written on the page or performed live on the stage? I could never exhaust it. It's been really good to me, and I plan to keep on exploring it for as long as I can, which really translates to the rest of my life. On this trip, I brought a book with me. It's a rather heavy book titled Western Wind, An Introduction to Poetry by John Frederick Nims, 3rd edition. My friend Ben Teitelbaum in Taos gave this book to me a few years ago. Actually, he loaned it to me, and I refused to give it back. And he said, well, Navé, you just keep it. So I have Ben to thank for this book, and it's been a treasure for me. I'm of the mind that this may be the only book I'll ever need because I'll never really understand everything in it. It's deep, and yet it's easy to grasp the concepts that Nims offers in this book, Western Wind. I imagine when the western wind blows, you feel it, and there's something very poetic about the western wind. Also something poetic about the southern wind as well. Maybe the eastern wind. I don't know about the northern wind. When it blows, it gets cold, and I like being warm. And poetry does warm me, even on the cold days, which reminds me of a poem by Robert Frost titled Dust of Snow. The way a crow shook down on me, the dust of snow from a hemlock tree, has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I rued. I imagine the day Robert Frost was rueing was a cold day, and when the snow fell on his head or his face or his shoulder, he was warmed by the sense of the winter. I'm thinking of another poem now that contrasts summer with winter, and it brings the natural world into play. It's called On the Grasshopper and the Cricket. It's by John Keats, and here's how it goes. The poetry of earth is never dead. When all of the birds are faint with the hot sun and hide in cooling trees, a voice will run from hedge to hedge about the new-mown mead. That is the grasshopper's. He takes the lead in summer luxury. He has never done with his delights, for when tired out with fun, he rests at ease beneath some pleasant weed. The poetry of earth is ceasing never on a lone winter evening when the frost has wrought a silence. From the stove there shrills the cricket's song, in warmth increasing ever, and seems to one in drowsiness half lost, the grasshoppers among some grassy hills. And that was On the Grasshopper and the Cricket by John Keats. If you live in Taos, New Mexico, and you happen to have some crickets in your house, I've had some crickets in my house in Taos, and at first they give you a sense of romance, like summer is coming even though it's the winter time. Also, if you live in Taos and you end up with a bunch of crickets in your house, you know that pretty soon the novelty wears off and the things will just drive you crazy. And they're clever as they can be. They're very difficult to catch. And they just chirp and keep on chirping. John Keats opens his poem by saying, "The poetry of earth is never dead." And sometimes you wish those crickets were dead, even though you do want the poetry to stay alive. So if you have crickets in your house in Taos, you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, you probably have an idea of what I'm talking about, because somewhere along the line, maybe a cricket did strike your fancy or drive you batty with his chirping, and more chirping. Enough of those crickets. Let's go back to Nim's Western Wind book for a moment. And the reason I'd like to is because I do want to continue to reference the natural world, the dust of snow, the crickets, the summer, the winter, spring, the fall. And if for some reason you think you don't have a poetic nature, or your poetic nature is rather limited, reconsider that. Think about how many times you've been astounded by the simple natural things around you. Or if you have a pet, how many times have you been astounded by the way your pet behaves, the way your pet accepts you without conditions? All of those things that you notice and you're aware of, those are things that fit into your poetic disposition category. This ability to appreciate things poetically is as natural as the sunrise. Here's what John Frederick Nim says in his book Western Wind about this sensibility. The nature of poetry follows from our own human nature. The main divisions are organized as we ourselves are. Human experience begins when the senses give us images of ourselves or of the world outside. These images arouse emotions, which, with their images, we express in words, which are physically produced and have sound, which comes to our ear, riding the air on waves of rhythm. The whole process from beginning is fostered and overseen by an organizing mind, acting with the common sense of our everyday life, even when dealing with the uncommon sense of dreams or visions. If this is the first time you've heard this, then you may not have picked up everything that Nims is saying. I've gone over this a fair amount, and I get something new or some insight every time I read it. So the main point I think is most important here is the opening line, the nature of poetry follows from our own human nature. And if that is true, and I believe it is, then our human nature is what we have in common. So how you view the world and how you translate what you see and how you express it is full of your poetic disposition, even if you're unaware of it. One of the reasons why I'm interested in promoting this idea that we all have a poetic disposition is because when I was younger, in my 20s, I had no idea that when I first saw the Rockies in my early 20s after driving overnight through Kansas, that dazzle was my poetic disposition. I admit I was really surprised to see snow in June since I'd grown up in Western North Carolina. And if you live in Western North Carolina, you know that by the time June comes, there will be no snow in the Carolinas, and that includes the highest peak east of the Mississippi, Mount Mitchell. So when I saw the Colorado Rockies all snow-capped in June and flash back on the mountains of Western North Carolina in June, the two images together forced me into a poetic disposition, trying to figure it out. I didn't make any poetry around it, but I do now recall how that contrast played out and still does in my imagination. I've seen the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies many times since then, and yet, in some ways, I'm still amazed when June comes round and there's snow on the Rockies. And even though I wasn't aware of my poetic disposition in my 20s, I was aware that I wanted to see America, and one of the ways I managed to see America was to hitchhike. I thought by hitchhiking across America, I would learn something, and indeed I did. One of the things I learned was how big the Pacific Ocean was when I arrived at the shore. Also, how cold it was and how powerful it was. I had only known the oceans of the East Coast. When I was a little boy, my father would take the family to Myrtle Beach, and we would spend the week there on vacation. And when I was in high school, I went to Myrtle Beach for spring break. So my idea of an ocean was what you see along the Carolina coast, north and south. Waves coming in, long smooth beaches, lots of sand, warm water, warm nights. Even in the wintertime, it's warm along the coast of Carolina. So when I got to the Pacific Ocean, I had no idea what to do with the rocks and the cliffs and the seagulls and the seals and all of the rest of these creatures, not to mention the fog and the chill. Again, I was trying to make sense of all of this with my poetic disposition, using all of my senses, as Nims says, which is my human nature. But I didn't really know I could translate that into poetry, but Robert Frost did. And here's a poem that he wrote about the Pacific that sticks with me to this day. Once by the Pacific. The shattered water made a misty din. Great waves looked over others coming in and thought of doing something to the shore that water never did to land before. The clouds were low and hairy in the skies, like locks blown forward in the gleam of eyes. You could not tell, and yet it looked as if the shore was lucky in being backed by cliff. The cliff in being backed by continent. It looked as if a night of dark intent was coming, and not only a night, an age. Someone had better be prepared for rage. There would be more than ocean water broken before God's last put out the light was spoken. And that was Once by the Pacific by Robert Frost. And indeed, I was once by the Pacific and was overwhelmed by all of the things that I saw. The raging seemed there, unlike what I knew on the Carolina coast. And when years later I came across Frost's poem, Once by the Pacific, I thought this is exactly how I felt when I was going up the coast for the first time, there through the craggy rocks and the high cliffs winding along Highway 1. So you can get something in a poem that will remind you of things that are in the past. The beauty of it is you don't actually have to write the poem yourself, although I recommend giving it a shot. You will not be as skilled as Robert Frost or Elizabeth Bishop or Edna St. Vincent Millay when you write these poems for the first time. You have to build up to that kind of mastery. The point isn't so much building the mastery quickly, it's knowing that you have access to something that will allow you to deepen your own poetic sensibilities. And you don't have to be a highly skilled poet to do this. All you have to do is set the intention to explore something you're thinking about and use phrasing and words and imagery and all of the things that come with putting something on the page as a way of dipping deeper into your natural poetic sensibilities. So when you set the intention to work with your poetic sensibilities, all kinds of things happen. One thing for sure, you cannot pass a day without something happening. Your entire existence is based on things happening. You create things that happen, and 8 billion people around the world are creating other things that are happening all at the same time. So there's no way to avoid things happening. Robert Penn Warren speaks really well to this in a poem titled, Something is Going to Happen. Here's how it goes. Something is going to happen. I tell you, I know. This morning, I tell you, I saw ice in the bucket. Something is going to happen. And you can't duck it. The way the wind blows is the way the dead leaves go. Something is going to happen. And I'm telling you so. Something is going to happen. I declare it. It always happens on days like this, Mother said. No, I didn't make the world or make apples red. But if you are alive, you'll buck up and try to bear it. For this morning, the sun rose in the east. I swear it. Something is going to happen. I swear it will. Men have wept watching water flow, and feet move fastest down the old tracks they know. Look how light is lying across that hill. Something may happen today if you don't sit still. Something is going to happen without a doubt. If you aren't careful, it might happen this very minute. Have you ever looked in a drawer and found nothing in it? Have you ever opened your mouth and tried to shout, but something happened and the shout would not come out? Something is going to happen, whatever you say. Whether you look out the window or walk in the door, some things will be less and other things more. It's simply no use to turn your head away. Something is bound to happen on a day like today to change everything, any which way. For the sound of your name is only a mouthful of air, and the lost and the found may be found or lost anywhere. Therefore, to prepare you, there's one more thing I must say. Delight may dawn as the day dawned, calmly today. That was Something is Going to Happen by Robert Penn Warren. You might be interested to know that the poems I'm working with today throughout this narrative have great significance for me because these are the poems I used when I was touring with a theater company I co-founded with some creative collaborators in Asheville many years ago in the 80s. The company was called Poetry Alive. And one of the reasons why I find it still compelling to this day is because we were quite successful. I earned my living for many years performing poetry on stages all over America and sometimes overseas in the international schools, performing poems from the school textbooks, just like the ones that I'm performing for you now. In fact, Robert Penn Warren's poem, Something is Going to Happen, is the poem that we used to open every show. Something is going to happen, we would say from the stage, and off we would go for 45 minutes. And we performed poems the teachers requested. So many of the teachers reported they had a lot of trouble keeping the students engaged while they were trying to discuss poetry. So we solved a big problem. We were loud, boisterous, and a bit irreverent when it came to the poems. And that was something that the students absolutely loved. They'd never seen adults play as much as we played on those stages. And this was in the 80s. I don't think it's changed much. Play is as important now as it's ever been. It's just part of our human creative inclinations. What we were doing worked because we were following along in a tradition that is as old as the hills. People have always told stories, always played with poetry, always put music to it, always done something to it. It's because we need to be together. It's 2025 now, and so often I hear people say, gosh, if we could only have a house concert, if we could only get together in a small group and have a deep conversation that wasn't influenced by all the busyness around us. So it worked in the 80s, and it still works to this day. I was recently in Santa Fe. My friend Nathan Brown was playing a house concert. He and his daughter had teamed up to do this concert. Nathan is a spoken word artist, a poet. He was once the poet laureate of Oklahoma. He's also a singer-songwriter. So too is his daughter. We had maybe 15 people in the room. Everybody dropped $20 in the jar, whatever they could afford. And Sierra and Nathan sang, talked, read a bit of poetry, and we all engaged. We were all there influencing the moments. And that's what I think people need. And when we were traveling around in the 80s on the stages, in libraries, in gymnasiums, never used microphones, we did yell a lot, and it was dramatic overacting. I have to say, we really overdid it. But that said, we did have a lot of fun. And when we would finish with the shows, we would go into the classrooms and we would ask the students to engage in a conversation about how they felt when they were experiencing live performance on the stage, and then engage them by a few more questions in how they might feel if they became involved more deeply in performing the poems that they were studying in a live sort of way. And they always took to it because we weren't confining them to any standard, except the standard of creative engagement and playfulness, which has been around for a long time. Might not even be a standard. It just might be a state of being that allows any of us to be more productive because it feels good and it's exciting. And it allows us to discover possibilities, creative possibilities, we might not have suspected were even there. That can be very exciting. And then when you start to put the combinations together, it becomes even more engaging. Curiosity revs up, and it becomes a fuel for more and more and more. So when we were back in the 80s working with these students, we used that, I call it the salon approach, an open conversation in a room where everybody is influencing everybody else and exploring the what ifs of the moments. The salon approach also has an invitation built into it. It's the invitation to participate. It's an open-ended sensibility that everything all the people in the room bring to the table or bring to the conversation has great value, has influential value, even if it seems insignificant. Once it builds on the other elements that are being offered in the circle, something emerges that has a strong foundational sense of wholeness. And throughout that whole time, we were working with what I've always called the imaginative storm approach to creativity, with a theme from the imaginative storm to the creative form. So when we were on the stage presenting these poems that had been written by all of these classic poets, we were working with the creative form. And then when we went into the classroom, we approached the classroom exploration from the imaginative storm point of view, leaving the creative form back on the stage as a memory in the minds of the students who wanted to really romp around and play and get messy. So when you think of this idea of going from the imaginative storm to the creative form, it sounds linear. You start in the storm and you go to the form. Start at A, you go to B, and you finally get to the end, which actually isn't what happens at all. If you think about the idea of imagination and form and how it's like a storm, and a storm is anything other than linear. Yeah, maybe a storm moves east to west or west to east, north to south. Storms have directions, and yet the storm, no matter which way it's moving, it's more comprehensive. It's a weather condition that's part of many, many different weather conditions. The clear day does not seem to have a linear form. It just sits on the moments that you live in. The storm also settles in that way as well. So it is really important when you think about the creative work you do, the writing that you do, the stories that you want to tell, or anything else that you want to make. Think of yourself as part of an all-encompassing environment that you're working in, a bit like some magical forest that you can travel anywhere you want. And indeed, the imagination is a bit like a magical forest when you think about it. So those students way back when saw this. They didn't see it intellectually. They saw it emotionally, intuitively. It was part of their creative instinct. They knew they could engage and be free form like the storm forms. And the idea of free form, when you think about it for a moment, free form, the form is free within the circularity of all of the stuff that's happening when you're engaging your creativity. Or maybe when your creativity is engaging you, because it's always there and it's just waiting for you to acknowledge it, to show up and start doing something. Which brings us back to Robert Penn Warren's poem, Something is Going to Happen, which was more than a poem that opened the show. It was also an opportunity for us to take each stanza and insert a shorter poem in between each stanza. So when we were traveling around, as I said, it was a theater company. We always had two people on the stage. Sometimes we would have more, but mostly it was two people. And because we had two people on the stage, we could play with Robert Penn Warren's poem, Something is Going to Happen. And here's what we did. Because the poem has 6 stanzas, we had 5 opportunities to insert short, grade-appropriate poems in between each stanza, which meant that we had an opportunity to present 6 poems from the school textbook within a 3-minute time frame, opening each show. Robert Penn Warren's poem, Something is Going to Happen, stayed the same. We would insert grade-appropriate poetry in between the stanzas so that we could tailor the show to whatever grade level we were working with. So, for example, if we were working with kindergarten through the first grade, we would put nursery rhymes in. If we were working with the 11th and 12th grade high school students, we would put short poems by Robert Frost or Ezra Pound in. And I have to say, we relied quite a bit on Emily Dickinson because her poetry works on all levels, from the little kids all the way up to the adults. And since we were being paid pretty good money to do these shows, customer satisfaction was really important. And that meant three things. One, the principal of the school had to be satisfied. Two, the teachers had to be satisfied that we were sticking with the curriculum they were teaching. And three, the students had to be entertained throughout the show so they didn't lose focus and be excited when we came to the classrooms to teach them how to perform poetry as a way of studying it. Because we always opened our shows by saying, "This is poetry alive. Something is going to happen." And by the early 90s, we had 7 teams of poets traveling the country performing shows from mid-September all the way through till May and sometimes even into June. And during the summers, we would do teacher conferences and workshops and other kinds of gatherings. So going back to the opening of the show, because we needed to hold the attention of the students and because we had to have high energy, we also had to figure out how to present these pieces that were often presented in very dry ways to the students in a lively, forceful, exciting way that they could understand. So what we started to do, we started to script the poems. So Something Is Going to Happen became a scripted piece where both the poets on the stage would throw the lines back and forth between the two of them. And when the stanza came to an end, one of the poets would spin out and do one of the small poems and then dive back into the next stanza with the scripted pieces. And because we were playful with our scripting, the students weren't quite sure where we would go next, and we more or less knew where we would go, but there were a lot of variables involved in it. And I think that variableness of these shows, that's what kept their attention, and that's what made them want to experiment with their own work. We brought our own style to the pieces we performed on the stage. And when we were in the classroom, we encouraged the students to do the same thing. We said, whatever you do, whisper, yell, stand on your head, sit quietly at your desk, whatever you do is in keeping with your style. And that's what we want you to attempt to do. And sure enough, they did it. What I'll do now is give you an example of how it worked with a number of voices. Now, keep in mind, I'm making these voices up as I go along. On the stage, when we were presenting for the students, we used our own voices, so we didn't have to make up voices. I was number 1, and the poet working with me was number 2, and we went back and forth. People recognized our voices, and it worked really well. But for this, I'm going to play around a little bit with the different voices just to give you an example of how it worked. Something is going to happen. I tell you, I know. I tell you, this morning I saw ice in the bucket. Something is going to happen, and you can't duck it. The way the wind blows is the way the dead leaves go. Something is going to happen. I'm telling you so. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I rued. Something is going to happen, I declare it. It always happens on days like this, Mother said. No, I didn't make the world or make apples red. But if you're alive, you'll buck up and try to bear it. For this morning the sun rose in the east. I swear it. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Well, then there's a pair of us. Shh, don't tell. They'd banish us, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell one's name the livelong day to an admiring bog. And so that was the opening of Robert Penn Warren's Something Is Going to Happen. The Dust of Snow by Robert Frost, which was on the younger side, and I'm Nobody by Emily Dickinson, which, as I've said before, can work across the spectrum from the youngest kindergarten students all the way up to us, adults. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Do you want to be a nobody? Do you want to be a somebody? Does it really matter? Are you a somebody just because you were born? lots of questions come out of that Emily Dickinson poem. And there are a lot of other Emily Dickinson poems as well that do the same job. And the students started to get that when they would memorize them. And the thing that we were really keen on when we were performing those poems, especially the little ones inserted in between the longer stanzas of Something Is Going to Happen, we wanted to make sure the students understood that small has great power. The little stuff is where the action can lie just as much as the big stuff. So it's a lot easier to memorize a short poem than it is to memorize a long poem. That said, if you do have a long poem that you are interested in memorizing, you memorize it beat by beat, thought beat by thought beat. So what is a thought beat? Well, here's one. Something is going to happen. That's a thought beat. It's very clear. No doubt about it. Something is going to happen. You've heard that many times before. Guess what? You have that line memorized. So if you're going to memorize a short piece, it's easy to go through the few beats that are in the short piece. If you have a really, really long piece, you have to go through each beat as if each beat was its own poem, its own thought bubble, and dwell with that thought bubble for as long as it takes to become emotionally intrigued by it. Not so much attached to it, but intrigued by it, letting it invite you into its arena, its sensibility. Something Is Going to Happen is a good example of that. There are plenty of others as well, like I'm Nobody, Who Are You? That's the Emily Dickinson opening. I'm Nobody, Who Are You? That's two thought beats. So the opening line for that Emily Dickinson poem is really simple. I'm nobody. Now, if you think about that for a moment, you will have it. I'm nobody. That's a really, really powerful statement. And it begs all kinds of conversations. You could have an entire salon around that one thought beat. I'm nobody. Do you want to be nobody? Do you want to be spared? Do you want to be relevant? Do you want to be important? Do you want to be famous? Do you want to be invisible? Do you want to be noticed? Do you want to be loved? That may be what's underneath that piece. I'm nobody. I want to be loved. Can you see me now? Will you love me when I let you see me, or when you are able to see me? It takes courage to move in a direction like that. All built into that little poem that works for kindergarten students because they don't understand what it means to not be noticed, because they are busy playing and noticing themselves as much as the others around them are noticing them. So you might be wondering, does any of this really matter? Did we have an impact on those students? I really don't know. I can tell you the operation, Poetry Alive, went on for years and years and years, finally closed down in 2015. I don't know how many students saw somebody on stage performing like we did years ago. I have bumped into a few people along the way who remember Poetry Alive came to my school once, they say. I don't remember who was on stage, but I do remember they performed poems. And it inspired me. Occasionally somebody has told me that it led them in the direction of studying poetry or studying writing or majoring in English or becoming a teacher. I can't be sure about any of that, but I do know that when you show up and you do what you are called to do, you'll likely influence people in positive ways. One of the reasons I enjoyed bringing the playfulness to the shows, and still do enjoy bringing playfulness to whatever I do, is because I understood then, as I understand now, this is a very serious world we live in. Sure, I have a lot of lighthearted times with my friends. I enjoy going to the coffee shop and having conversations about global problems we wish we could do something about. I've concluded the things that we can do are the small things, the little things, like I told the students all those years ago. No matter what you do, you're going to change things. Something's going to happen to change everything, Robert Penn Warren says. And indeed, every move you make changes things. You can do the little things. And when the change happens, it can happen unnoticed. Maybe just move the dust around in your house, or somebody notices what you're doing and it inspires them to do something that's close to their calling, close to their heart, Maybe you could call it passion, certainly close to the things that interest them. You can be upbeat while at the same time you can address some sticky issues. As I said, when we were performing for the school students, the young ones got the levity. When we moved into the upper grades, the 11th grade into the 12th grade, we shifted a bit into the more serious material. And one poem that stuck with me that I performed once in a while was a poem titled The Food Thief by Sharon Olds. I was a little hesitant to perform it because it does some heavy lifting. So I'd like to give you an example of that poem as a counterpoint to the more lighthearted sensibilities of I'm Nobody, Who Are You? So here is The Food Thief by Sharon Olds, and I think it is as important today as it was when she wrote it many years ago, because the issues of hunger and the injustices of the world are still as much or more in play now than ever. After all, 8 billion people, we're trying to figure something out. So this is The Food Thief by Sharon Olds, and it's set in the Uganda drought. The food thief. They drive him along the road in the steady, conscious way they drove their cattle, when they had cattle, when they had homes and living children. They drive him with peeled sticks, snapped from trees whose bark cannot be eaten, snapped, not cut. No one has a knife. And the trees that can be eaten have been eaten, leaf and trunk, and the long roots pull from the ground and eaten. They drive him and beat him, a loose circle of thin men with sapling sticks, driving him along slowly, slowly beating him to death. He turns to them with all the eloquence of the body, the wrist turned out, the vein up his forearm, running like a root just under the surface, the wounds on his head ripe and wet as a loam furrow cut back at plow time to farrow a trench for the seed. His eye pleading, the iris black and gleaming as his skin, the white, a dark, occluded white like cloud cover on the morning of a day of heavy rain. His lips are open to his brothers as the body of a woman might be open, as the earth itself was split and folded back and wet and seedy to them once. The lines on his lips, fine as 1,000 tributaries of a root hair, a river. He is asking them for life with his whole body, and they are driving his body all the way down the road because they know the life he is asking for. It is their life. And that was The Food Thief by Sharon Olds. So I think The Food Thief is a good example of how powerful a poem can be. And when I performed it for the school students, 11th and 12th grade, sometimes 10th grade, they got it. They understood. I've come to think the students understand more than the adults think they do. They have to, because life is quick and fast, and as they grow up, things are changing dramatically. Once you become an adult, you can hold the status quo fairly easy. But when you're in the 10th grade going on the 11th, then from the 11th to the 12th, the status quo shifts all around you because everybody's changing. So the students understood The Food Thief. They might have even understood it better than I understood it. I think I get it now. I see the news. I am engaged politically. I understand the implications of the global situations that we deal with. And I think that poem, The Food Thief by Sharon Olds, is a classic example of a piece that endures no matter what age it's in. And it adds something to our thinking, which is, in my mind, the whole reason why we attempt to engage in the creative process, to add something to our own personal thinking and hopefully to shine some light in the direction of others and give them some meaning and value as well that they can use as they move through their days and sometimes through their nights if they're not asleep. So as you might imagine, all of this poetic work did lead me to write some poetry over the years. You've often heard me mention, if you listen to this show, the writing collaboration that I'm involved in with Allegra Houston. We call it the Imaginative Storm Writing Project or the Writing Collaboration. And we gather every Saturday on a Zoom call and we spend an hour, and in that hour we generate pieces of writing in 10 minutes. The pieces that I generate, I generally clean up and save them for maybe a book, or sometimes put them on Facebook. I make them so I can share them with whomever listens. So in this case, I'm going to give you some of the work just to give you a sense of where I go with this. So this piece is titled Rip-Curled Edge. I find my way along the rip-curled edge. Memories of highways, deers pass by. Cries from the church bells 2 miles off. I can see through the tattered sun. I hear small whispers around the next corner. Earlier today, a few dogs barked. The dark sky waited for the sun. The workshop out back had sawdust on the floor. I find my way along the rip-curled edge. The dogs still bark. I drank coffee this morning in the pipe-smudged silence that must hold young lovers somewhere. Please let silence hold young lovers like the Dreamland Drive-In held us when we were young and all longing for horsepower in our fragile growing. Can I have a dull room to watch the years go by? Just a little more time will do. Just a few more memories, just a few. I will rise now along the rip-curled edge. Lake, do you know what will happen next? Edge me past the blank mystery. Fill me with light and prayers. The revolution has hard sounds out beyond the water, over there, where the distant rumble understands cloud language, and bodies not lost are all true in the bleeding yellow moonlight along the rip-curled edge. And that was a piece of poetry that I generated in 10 minutes. That said, if you look back on the stories that I've been telling, the 10 minutes is the time frame it took me to take what was inside of my imagination and put it on the page. Afterwards, I edited it some so that you heard what you heard. But it's taken me a long, long time to learn how to allow myself to think like those students did way back when we were performing all over the country. A lot of those students just did not understand how powerful they were. And I suspect even to this day, students don't understand how powerful they are. Indeed, they're there to learn, and students need mentors. Students need people to point the way. We all do, I suppose, no matter how old we get. And yet, when you're young, it is good to have people show you some of those edges, maybe take you along the rip-curled edges. And so that idea of the rip-curled edge reminds me of when I would go to the beach and walk along the shore around the Myrtle Beach area. Now, here we are back to Once by the Pacific. The raging Pacific was not my idea of the beach, even though its idea of itself is the raging Pacific. I think of the rip-curled edge more in the Pacific than I do along the shoreline in Myrtle Beach. That said, the easy waves can become rip-roaring with great ease. All you need is one hurricane, and you know what happens then. One of the things I love about consistently generating content, material, poetry, call it whatever you like, themes emerge. And those themes can tell you stories of yourself, give you information about yourself that you might not have otherwise been aware of or maybe wouldn't have noticed. So here's another poem I wrote in 10 minutes. Again, it took more than 10 minutes to write it. It just took 10 minutes to get it onto the page. This one is called Ivory in the Night Sky. The thick moon fell amused out of yesterday's sunrise. I was there, between my old dreams and my bygone home, red and warm with beds and sheets. New people live there now. There's a boat in the yard, and a man sings a warm tune on a hill full of rainbow houses. One day I will become a werewolf hipster, pearl-handled umbrella, sea mist shoes, trousers of blue moon. I'll walk down the avenue. Time travel with me. Come, let's buy passage on the large ship in the harbor. I am no longer afraid of amusing the crescent moon. I understand light, dust, and people with long memories combing circles around small gods nobody believes in. Why should anybody believe in small gods, those terrible little things with tight lips that spew coded language, dry and dying under trees, those little gods waddling around like marble statues? I am not a small god, nor will I ever be. Today I knock. The big gods welcome me with their large eyes and wings and booming songs. Today I will put the moon all ivory back in the big night sky. Those little gods will sink in the long mud that's been there forever along the edge of old men's dreams. And that was Ivory in the Night Sky. Like I said, I wrote that piece in 10 minutes during one of our Imaginative Storm Writing Prompt of the Week sessions. I'm noticing in the writing that I'm doing these days, the theme that keeps emerging is the theme of time passing. Maybe it's because I'm more aware of time passing now than ever. And one of my themes is time passing and getting older, and what do you do with it? Have you asked that question lately? Maybe you have. Dylan Thomas addresses it in a poem that he wrote that I really like, that's always worked for me, and I performed it a fair amount for the school students. And it's titled, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. And it's a fairly famous poem. You might recognize some of the lines in it. So here you go. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced on a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late. They grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears. I pray, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And that was Dylan Thomas's Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. Even though this poem is very famous, and it does speak to our longing to live, it also makes me wonder why one would rage against the dying of the light, or why one would not go gentle into that good night. Why not drop the rage and just let it happen? Why not go gentle into that good night? There's a big contrast here, a big tension between needs. So speaking of the good night, I will close with one last poem that I really like and enjoy so much. It was written by Edna St. Vincent Millay, and it's titled Recuerdo. We were very tired. We were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night on the ferry. It was bare and bright and smelled like a stable, but we looked into a fire. We leaned across a table. We lay on a hilltop underneath the moon, and the whistles kept blowing, and the dawn came soon. We were very tired. We were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night on the ferry, and you ate an apple, and I ate a pear from a dozen of each we had bought somewhere. And the sky went wan, and the wind came cold, and the sun rose dripping, a bucket full of gold. We were very tired, and we were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night on the ferry. We hailed, "Good morrow, mother," to a shawl-covered head, and bought a morning paper, which neither of us read. and she wept, "God bless you," for the apples and the pears, and we gave her all our money but our subway fares. That was Recuerdo by Edna St. Vincent Millay. I've always loved that poem because it's a love poem about two people being in love. It's also a love poem about New York City. I spent a lot of time in that city over the years, although I have to say I haven't been there in about 6 or 7 years. Prior to that, I was there every year for decades, really, and lived there for a long time as well. Shared some places with Tish Fayez. I am, in fact, recording this in Manila, and Tish and I are still together 21 years later, and I'm in another city, Manila, which is a very, very different city than New York. And yet these big, throbbing cities do have something, some mystery. Maybe it's because things can happen really quickly and change everything any which way, no problem at all. And you can love a city. You can acquire a taste for it, but you've got to lean into all of this. And that's why I enjoy doing this show, Twice 5 Miles Radio, and that's why I've really enjoyed leaning into these poems that I've explored with you today. I've never done a show like this before. I'm experimenting with different ways to present these shows, which I air in Asheville on WPVM-FM and in Taos on KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio. It's fun to experiment with solo shows like this. And I've always enjoyed reading poetry, reciting it, experimenting with it. So to be able to spend an entire hour with you playing around with these poems, it's been a real pleasure. I really, really enjoy it. And I so appreciate that you've spent this time with me and that you've listened to these poems. And if you do have poetry in your life, if you do enjoy the ideas that your poetic disposition will allow you to encounter, will allow you to discover, I would like to hear about it. My email is navé@jamesnavé.com. It would be really great to have an email from you. And the reason I'm saying that, I have aired this show for almost 10 years. And each week I say, I'd love to hear from you, navé@jamesnavé.com. And in the last 10 years, I've gotten about 6 emails. That's it. That might surprise you. You might think a lot of people send me emails, but actually I'm quite surprised that I've only received 6 or 7 over the last 10 years. It's a whole decade. You've got to admit, it's kind of an interesting little statistic. Certainly goes in the direction you wouldn't expect, which is not all that many emails rather than a whole lot of them. Either way, I know that people listen to this show because people have stepped up on the street in Asheville and told me so. And I've had more than one person stop me in front of the post office in Taos and tell me they really appreciate the show. So it's just a curious thing not getting any emails. I don't know why that is. If you have any answers to that, I'd love to hear it. navé@jamesnavé.com. And I think I will close with one little poem by Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. And that was Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. So there you go. That brings us around to the end of our time together. I would like to thank you ever so much for tuning in to Provocative Conversations from Twice 5 Miles Radio. I'm your host, James Navé. This show always airs every weekend on WPVM-FM in Asheville and KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com. For more on Walter's music, Davine Dial, thank you ever so much for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville. And Robin Collier and Mike Tilley, thank you for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio there in Taos. I really do appreciate it. And in closing, remember, something is going to happen. I tell you, I know. I tell you, this morning I saw ice in the bucket. Something is going to happen, and you can't duck it. The way the wind blows is the way the dead leaves go. Something is going to happen, and I'm telling you so. And something is always happening, no matter where you go or what you do. So thank you for spending this time with me on Provocative Conversations from Twice 5 Miles Radio. I really do appreciate it. I hope you come back sometime very soon. Till then, here's hoping I catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.